Okay, all yours, Sian.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to both Dimitra and Robin for two really great papers. I think I'm here to offer a perspective more as a traditional ancient historian who maybe paddles in the shallow margins of zooarchaeology. And because of that, I think I can pick up on some of the things that were said in both presentations. The first thing that really strikes me coming to it from a background in history is just the very different scales that are used in thinking about zooarchaeology, thinking about paleobotany. The historical period that we specialise in tends to sit in a really tiny and often pretty ineffective range of the whole scale of what's being looked at in wider studies. And this is something which I want to come back to towards the end, because I think it has problems, but it also has potential. The thing that really strikes me that came out of both of those presentations is the potential that there is for really rich description of ancient environments and ancient landscapes, both in terms of the interactions with animals. Excuse me, the window cleaners have turned up unexpectedly. Both in terms of interactions with animals, the plants that surrounded people, the kind of environment that they lived in. But it also, I think, should be a salutary reminder to us that our own understanding of the environment as moderns within the 21st century can often be significantly impoverished. And I think this is something that is really useful to bring to an understanding of ancient environments, that there's a very strong divergence between the ancient experience and the modern experience in knowledge of and awareness of the world around us. I think that comes through with examples like what Dimitra showed us, lists of fish species, what Robin showed us with lists of tree species. We live in a very impoverished environment these days, whatever country we live in, and that is very different. But we also tend to have an extremely limited knowledge of the plants and the creatures around us, which isn't echoed by ancient experience at all. And what you find in the ancient world is a really rich vocabulary of description, a really rich vocabulary of plants and animals, which is, I think, very often passed over in historians' takes on the ancient world. The names of plants, when you read somebody like Columella, who Robin mentioned, talking about how animals are fed, for instance, there's this huge vocabulary of plant species, which is something which is seen as wildly specialised and very few people actually engage with. And likewise, animal species. Again, there are some really fine distinctions which don't map at all onto modern categories of animals, but which were current among ancient people, current in ancient thought. And unless we can get down to an understanding of that, it's actually going to be very hard to understand how ancient people were interacting with their own environment. And if I can, I just wanted to bring up one slide, which is another fish mosaic. Yeah, I hope you can see it. Let's see if I can make it a bit bigger. Yep, this is another fish mosaic like the one that Robin showed. This one is from North Africa, and it's a bit more regimented than the Pompeii one. But fish mosaics, I think, are absolutely fascinating because they're that are found all over the Roman Empire. This one is from a domestic setting, and they're things that are found, like the Pompeii one, in domestic settings. But they show, obviously, what you have is fish species being shown larger than life size here. It's a fishing scene with fishermen, but the fish species are arranged in a way to make them all completely identifiable. What's notable is that everyone is different. This is a compendium of fish species. They are all identifiable as modern species, but even more than that, fish mosaics are localized. They show you what species you would find if you went down to the end of the dock and started fishing with line, or if you went out to sea and fished with a net. These are the species that you would bring in this particular region in North Africa. They're not the same species as you get at Pompeii, and they're not the same species that you get in Asia Minor or wherever. That there is this enormous level of awareness, which is something that we, as I said, as modern people, can tend to be blind to in our thinking about ancient sources. So, yeah, where I wanted to go with this was just to pick up on, again, what Dimitra said about the investigation of specific sites. And I think some of the examples about reading deposits can lead to really rich understandings of how people are using the environment. And likewise, Robin's studies from Pompeii, looking at how people are interacting with the wooded environment for the purpose of fuel. But the question for me, the question which arises from zooarchaeological and paleobotanical study generally, is a bit of a broader one, which is that the idea of landscape, the idea of the environment generally, is a very humanocentric concept. It's one that puts humans at the heart of understanding the ancient world and sort of sees it through a human lens. And this is obviously because archaeology itself focuses through human inhabited sites and takes as its theme human exploitation of the landscape. And it's often envisaged in this very top-down way as exploitation, what humans do to animals, what humans do to the environment. You can actually hear that as a kind of dominant metaphor that comes through people talking about it. But my question is it possible to broaden out from this, to use these kinds of studies, because they have the potential to be much broader in time, to think about interactions in the ancient environment in a bit of a different way? And the example that I wanted to end on talking about is one that comes from the much greater time frame. There have been some fascinating studies about cave use of cave sites as Paleolithic period, with different animal species using cave sites. And in particular, hyenas and humans often had the same hunting grounds in the Paleolithic period and used the same den sites seasonally. The humans would move in when the hyenas had gone elsewhere, and then when the humans moved on, the hyenas would come back again. And so you have two apex predators exploiting the same resources and living periodically in the same environment. But it's a way of thinking about an ecology which doesn't necessarily put humans at the center, that when these cave sites are investigated, they're investigated as hyena sites and human sites combined. And I wonder if there isn't some potential to do some thinking about ancient environments in a way which isn't just about what do humans do to the landscape, because as Robin said, this can actually lead to an over-reading of a lot of texts from the ancient world, this whole deforestation debate. And if we can, in some ways, broaden out what we do to think about, well, how do animals and plants interact? How do animals, including humans, interact with each other? How does the environment impact on the ecology as a whole? Because I think that actually gives us a potential for thinking about the experience of the environments in the ancient world, which can, I think, be richer than one which is just focused on agriculture and exploitation.